Commander Tarkovich sat alone in his small office, the blue glow of the holographic display casting eerie shadows across his face. Outside the window, the colony of New Arcadia stretched before him. Once a promising settlement, now a collection of desperate people facing starvation. The crops had failed for the third season in a row. The soil, which had tested perfect during initial surveys, had revealed a hidden toxin that only activated when exposed to the native bacteria. The door slid open with a hiss. His aide, Han, entered with slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. "The last food reserves will be gone in 2 weeks, Commander. The supply ship isn't scheduled for another 60 days. Ta nodded. He had run the calculations himself, over and over, hoping for a different answer. How many will we lose? At least half the colony. The children first, then the elderly. Tay's heart constricted. His daughter, Jia, was in the next room, poring over her technical manuals as she always did. At 19, she wasn't a child anymore, but she would always be his child. After his wife's death 3 years ago, Jia was all he had left in the universe. There must be another way, Todd whispered. Han looked away. The neighboring systems have their own problems. The relief funds from Earth are tied up in bureaucracy. We've explored every option, sir. Every option except one. The message had arrived yesterday. A private communication from the Phyrexian consortium. They knew about Jia. Somehow, they had learned about her rare genetic mutation that allowed her to interface with the ancient technologies scattered throughout this sector of space. Technology that no other species, including humans, had been able to activate for thousands of years. The Phyrexians wanted Jia. They were willing to pay. "Leave me," Tay ordered. Han bowed slightly and exited, the door sliding shut behind him. Tai opened his drawer and removed a small device. With trembling fingers, he pressed the activation switch. A holographic figure materialized before his desk. A Phyrexian representative, insectoid in appearance, with compound eyes and 4 upper limbs folded formally across its thorax. "Commander Kovich," the Phyrexian spoke, its translator converting the clicks and whistles of its native language into smooth, accentless human speech. "Have you considered our proposal?" "I have questions," Ta said, his voice rough. "Of course. What exactly would you require of my daughter?" The Phyrexian's head tilted slightly. "She would work with our research division, activating and studying precursor artifacts. Her ability to interface with the technology is unique. We have found no other being in the galaxy with such capabilities. And her treatment, her living conditions. She would be treated as a most honored guest, Commander. Private quarters aboard our research vessel, the finest foods compatible with human physiology, access to our libraries and educational systems, protection at all times." Tay's hand clenched into a fist. "And if she wants to leave, to come home?" The initial contract would be for 5 standard years, with options to renew. She would be permitted 2 home visits per year. The Phyrexian paused. "Commander, we understand this is difficult, but we are prepared to offer compensation that would solve your colony's problems permanently." "How much?" The words felt like ash in his mouth. 10 billion galactic credits. Tay nearly fell from his chair. The sum was astronomical, enough to import food for the entire colony, upgrade their agricultural systems, build proper defenses against the planet's harsher elements, and still have funds left for generations. "That's impossible. The price reflects the value of your daughter's abilities to our research," the Phyrexian stated matter-of-factly. "The precursor technology could revolutionize travel, medicine, energy production. Your daughter is the key to unlocking it all." The commander stood and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see workers in the fields, desperately trying to salvage something. Anything from the blighted crops. Children too thin, moving slowly to conserve energy. His people were dying. "I need to discuss this with Jia," he said finally. "With respect, Commander, we have studied human family dynamics extensively. Your daughter would refuse out of loyalty to you, despite the benefit to your colony. The choice must be yours alone. You're asking me to sell my child, Ta whispered. We are offering employment, Commander. Prestigious, well-compensated employment that will save thousands of lives, including her own. Tai closed his eyes. Images flashed through his mind. His late wife, smiling as she held infant Jia in her arms. Jia at 10, fearlessly climbing the colony's tallest trees. Jia at 16, demonstrating her unusual talent by accidentally activating a small precursor artifact found during a survey mission. She will hate me for this. Perhaps at first, the Vrexian acknowledged. But she will understand when she sees the good her sacrifice has done. And she will be safe, Commander. This we promise. Tad returned to his desk and sank into his chair. Show me the contract. A new hologram appeared, pages of legal text in both Vrexian and human standard. Ta spent an hour reading every line, asking for clarifications, demanding modifications to protect Joe's rights and well-being. The Vrexian agreed to each reasonable request. In the next room, he could hear Jia humming softly as she worked, the same tune her mother used to sing. His heart felt like it was being torn from his chest. When would she leave? He asked. A transport would arrive within 3 days. Enough time for your colony to receive emergency supplies we would send ahead as a gesture of good faith. 3 days. 3 days to find another solution, or to say goodbye to his only child. The Vrexian's compound eyes blinked patiently. The contract requires your thumbprint, Commander. Tay's hand trembled as he raised it to the holographic document. Food for his people. Medicine. Survival. All that would cost was his soul and his daughter's freedom. She'll be treated with respect, the alien continued, sensing his hesitation. Given luxury, education. She's all I have left, Ta whispered. And now she will ensure your people's survival. The contract permits visits. She will understand, eventually. With a heavy heart, Ta pressed his thumb against the glowing signature line. The contract flashed green, then disappeared. It is done, the Vrexian said. The funds are being transferred now. The first supply ships will arrive within 24 hours. The alien's image flickered and vanished, leaving Tai alone in the blue-lit darkness of his office. Outside, he knew news of the transaction would spread rapidly across galactic communication channels. The largest sum ever paid for a human contract, a price that would shock civilizations from one end of the galaxy to the other. But here, in his small office, there was only the sound of his daughter still humming in the next room, unaware that her life had just changed forever. The morning sun crept through the window of their small dwelling on the outskirts of the colony center. But here, in his small office, there was only the sound of his daughter still humming in the next room, unaware that her life had just changed forever. The morning sun crept through the window of their small dwelling on the outskirts of the colony center. Jakovich sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by technical manuals and small pieces of ancient technology she had collected over the years. She ran her fingers over a small metal disc, feeling the familiar tingle as it hummed to life under her touch. The symbols etched on its surface glowed with a soft blue light. Jia had discovered her strange ability when she was just a child. While other children couldn't even see the symbols on these precursor artifacts, she could not only see them but understand them. It was as if the ancient machines whispered to her in a language only she could comprehend. She placed the disc down when she heard her father's heavy footsteps approaching her room. Commander Takovich stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. In the 3 days since the emergency food shipments had mysteriously arrived, he had been avoiding her, making excuses to leave whenever she entered her room. "Father, what's wrong?" Jia asked, setting aside her tools. "You look terrible." Ta stepped into the room but remained by the door. "We need to talk, Jia." Something in his voice made her stomach tighten. "About the food shipments. I heard they came from the Vrexian consortium. Since when do those bug-eye traders give anything away for free?" Ta flinched at her words. "They're not free, Jia. I figured that much. What did they want?" Mining rights. Access to our water reserves. They wanted you. The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Jia laughed, then stopped when she saw her father's expression hadn't changed. What do you mean, they'd wanted me? Your ability to interface with precursor technology. They've known about it for years, been watching you. They made an offer I couldn't refuse. Jia stood slowly, the small artifacts around her forgotten. What kind of offer? Food for the colony. Medical supplies. Technology to fix our soil problems. Tay's voice grew quieter. 10 billion galactic credits. The room seemed to spin around her. 10 billion. For what exactly? A 5-year employment contract. You'll work with their research division, helping them understand and activate precursor technology. The truth dawned on Jia with terrible clarity. When was this decided? 3 days ago. And when was I going to be told? When they came to collect me. Tai reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I was trying to find the right way to tell you. You did, Bohat. Jia's voice echoed through their small dwelling. Her dark eyes flashed with hurt and betrayal as she backed away from her father. The colony was dying, Jia. Everyone was dying. Tai reached for her, but she recoiled. So you sold me, your daughter. It's an employment contract, he insisted, though the words felt hollow. The Phyrexians need you. Your genetic anomaly. My mutation, she interrupted. The one that lets me hear the ancient machines. She had always considered it a curiosity, nothing more. The precursor technology responds only to you. The Phyrexians have searched for someone like you for centuries. Jia turned away, her hands trembling as she tried to process what was happening. Outside the window, she could see children playing in the colony square. Children who just days ago had been too weak from hunger to stand. Families carrying fresh food supplies back to their homes. Medical teams treating the sick with new equipment. All because of her, because of what her father had done. When do I leave? She asked, her voice barely audible. Today. They're sending a transport. Jia whirled around. Today. I don't even get time to say goodbye. I tried to negotiate for more time. But what? You'd already signed me away. She began grabbing items from around her room. Her tools, some clothes, the small photograph of her mother. 5 years. Will you even be alive when I come back? Will anyone I know still be here? You'll be allowed visits home twice a year, Ta said, watching helplessly as his daughter packed her life into a small bag. How generous of my new owners. It's not like that, Jia. You'll be treated well. They promised. The promises of the Phyrexian consortium. Jia laughed bitterly. Everyone knows how much those are worth. A soft chime sounded from outside their dwelling. The door indicator. Jia froze, her hand clutching her mother's photograph. That's them, isn't it? She whispered. Ta nodded, unable to speak. He moved to answer the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jia quickly finished packing her bag, her mind racing. She had heard stories about the Phyrexians, their vast trading empire, their technological prowess, their ruthless business practices. No one really knew what happened on their ships or in their research facilities. No one had ever been inside and returned to tell about it. Until now, perhaps. Until her. She heard voices from the main room. Her father and the mechanical tones of a Phyrexian translator. Taking a deep breath, she shouldered her small bag and stepped out to face her new reality. 2 Phyrexians stood in the center of the room. Their insectoid bodies were encased in sleek exoskeletons that seemed to shift colors with the light. Multiple eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Djokovic, the taller one said, its words translated by a small device at what passed for its throat. I am Research Director Mox. This is Security Chief Tall. We are pleased to finally meet you. I wish I could say the same, Jia replied coldly. If the Phyrexians were offended by her tone, they gave no indication. Your transport is prepared. We should depart soon to maintain our schedule. Jia looked at her father, who couldn't meet her eyes. I guess this is goodbye then. Gia, please understand, Ta began, his voice breaking. There was no other way. The colony. The colony gets to eat, she said flatly, shouldering her small bag. Thousands live. I get it. Gia, please. She turned at the door. You should have told me, Father. I would have volunteered. The look of surprise on his face was almost worth it. Almost. What do you mean? He asked. Did you think I wouldn't choose to save our people? That I'm so selfish I would let children starve when I could prevent it? She shook her head. You didn't trust me enough to make my own choice. That's what hurts the most. Director Mox moved toward the door. We should proceed. The orbital shuttle awaits. Gia stepped outside into the bright sunlight of New Arcadia. Colonists had gathered in the street, watching silently as she emerged with the Phyrexians. Some faces showed pity, others gratitude. She recognized friends, neighbors, people she had known all her life. People she was saving. As she walked toward the waiting transport, Gia straightened her shoulders. Whatever awaited her aboard the Phyrexian research vessel, she would face it on her own terms. And one day, she would return, not as the girl who was sold, but as someone who had chosen to save her people. Behind her, Commander Tarkovich watched his daughter leave, the weight of his decision crushing his heart even as he knew it had been the only choice. The shuttle journey to the Phyrexian flagship took 3 hours. Gia sat silently in her private compartment, watching through the viewport as New Arcadia, the only home she had ever known, shrank to a tiny dot and then disappeared entirely. Director Mox had attempted conversation several times, but she had responded with only the briefest answers until the Phyrexian finally left her alone with her thoughts. When the shuttle docked, Gia felt a strange sensation wash over her, like static electricity running across her skin. Something on the massive ship was calling to her, resonating with whatever genetic quirk gave her the ability to interface with precursor technology. You feel it already, Director Mox observed as they disembarked. Fascinating. Gia ignored the comment, taking in the vastness of the Phyrexian docking bay. Dozens of ships were moored in precisely arranged slots. Phyrexian workers moved with efficient purpose, their insectoid bodies gliding smoothly across the polished floor. Everything was sleek, metallic, and bathed in a bluish light that seemed designed to accommodate both human and Phyrexian vision. Your quarters have been prepared according to human comfort standards, Mox explained as they entered a transport tube. Tomorrow, you will begin your work. And what exactly will that work entail? Gia asked, her first full sentence since leaving New Arcadia. You will meet Director Pax, our lead researcher on precursor technology. He will explain everything. The transport tube deposited them in a residential section. Gia was shown to a large room with furnishings that approximated human tastes, though everything was slightly off, as if designed by someone who had only seen pictures of human living spaces. There was a bed, a food preparation area, a hygiene chamber, and a workstation. You may rest now, Mox said. Someone will collect you in 8 hours. After the Phyrexian left, Gia explored her new prison. Despite its size and apparent comfort, she noticed there was no door control on her side. She was locked in. The workstation provided access to what appeared to be an entertainment and information database, but she quickly discovered the limits of what she could access, mostly human literature, music, and basic science texts. Nothing about the Phyrexians, nothing about precursor technology, and no communication systems. 8 hours later, as promised, a different Phyrexian arrived to escort her. This one was smaller, with a more iridescent exoskeleton that shifted through blues and greens as it moved. I am Director Pax, it introduced itself. Please follow me to the research chamber. They traveled deeper into the ship, passing through several security checkpoints. Gia memorized their route, noting the reactions of other Phyrexians as she passed. Some showed what she interpreted as curiosity, others something closer to fear. Finally, they arrived at a sealed doorway guarded by 2 large Phyrexians, with weapon-like appendages attached to their exoskeletons. We have strict security protocols, Pax explained as the guards scanned them both. What lies beyond this door is the most valuable resource in the consortium's possession. The massive door slid open, revealing a chamber unlike anything Gia had seen before. Ancient technology lined the walls, dormant for millennia, until her presence caused it to pulse with soft blue light. The entire room seemed to awaken, panels illuminating one after another as if greeting her arrival. "Remarkable," murmured Director Pax, the Vrexian scientist who had become her handler. "No one has activated these systems since they were discovered." Gia approached one of the panels, drawn by an inexplicable connection. As her fingers touched the smooth surface, symbols appeared. The same language she had seen on the small artifacts she had studied at home, but vastly more complex and numerous. "Can you understand what it says?" Pax asked, moving closer. Gia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Some of it. It's welcoming me, recognizing something in my genetic pattern." "Excellent." Pax's translator couldn't fully convey the excitement in the Vrexian's clicks and whistles. "We have collected these artifacts from 17 different worlds. No one has been able to activate more than the most basic functions, and none have been able to read the language." Over the following weeks, Gia spent every day in the research chamber, working with the precursor technology. Each session revealed more of her abilities. She didn't just activate the machines, she communicated with them. The symbols conveyed meaning directly to her mind, bypassing language altogether. It was as if the technology had been designed specifically for someone with her genetic makeup. She learned that the precursors had been an ancient race that had vanished approximately 50,000 years ago, leaving behind remnants of their advanced technology across dozens of worlds. The machines in the research chamber were not isolated tools but nodes in a vast network. Defense systems, communication arrays, environmental controls, all designed to work together across interstellar distances. This node was responsible for atmospheric regulation on its planet. She explained to Pax one day, pointing to a curved panel. It could control weather patterns, filter toxins, even generate specific atmospheric conditions. "Could it be repurposed?" Pax asked. "To create weather conditions harmful to specific life forms, perhaps." The question made Gia pause. "Why would you want to do that?" "Purely theoretical," Pax responded quickly. "We seek to understand all capabilities." But Gia was beginning to notice a pattern in the Vrexian's questions, always probing for military applications, for ways to weaponize the technology, and always careful to keep her isolated. "Why am I kept isolated?" she asked Pax one day, after 3 weeks aboard the flagship. "For your protection," came the practiced response. "Protection from what?" "I haven't seen another human since I arrived. I haven't even seen most of your ship. Other species would attempt to take you if they knew of your abilities," Pax explained, "and many areas of the ship would be uncomfortable or dangerous for human physiology." Gia didn't believe him, but she nodded as if accepting the explanation. What Pax didn't know was that she had begun to access more than just the precursor technology in the research chamber. She had discovered that the ancient systems could connect to the Vrexian ship's information network, a connection the Vrexians themselves weren't aware of. At night, while supposedly sleeping, Gia used a small precursor device she had secretly taken to her quarters to access the ship's databases. She learned the true history of the precursor discoveries, how other species had fought wars over control of the technology, how the Vrexians had claimed most of it through conquest and covert operations. She discovered reports about herself, detailing her abilities and the potential applications. The Vrexians weren't just interested in understanding the technology. They planned to use it to establish dominance over all other spacefaring species, and Gia was the key to their plan. Most disturbing of all, she found contingency protocols for dealing with her if she became uncooperative or if her usefulness ended. The Vrexians weren't just afraid of losing her, they were afraid of her. As this realization settled over her, Gia made a decision. She would continue to work with them, continue to learn about her abilities and the full extent of the precursor network. But she would be careful about what knowledge she shared, and she would find a way to contact her father. Because now she understood the true price the Phyrexians had paid, not for a worker, but for a weapon. 3 months had passed since Jia arrived on the Phyrexian flagship. To Director Pax and the other researchers, she appeared to be a model worker, cooperative, insightful, and making steady progress with the precursor technology. What they didn't know was that each night, while they thought she was sleeping, Jia was working on a project of her own. In the dim light of her quarters, she carefully assembled tiny components salvaged from the research chamber. The Phyrexians were meticulous about tracking larger artifacts, but they overlooked the small fragments that sometimes broke off during testing. Over weeks, Jia had collected enough of these fragments to build something new, a communication device that would operate on frequencies the precursors had used, channels the Phyrexians couldn't monitor because they couldn't even detect them. Tonight was the test. Jia connected the final component, a crystal no larger than her fingernail that pulsed with inner light when she touched it. The device was crude compared to the elegant technology in the research chamber, but it would serve its purpose. She placed her hand on the assembled device and closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts as she'd learned to do with the larger systems. The crystal warmed beneath her palm, and she felt the familiar sensation of connection, like diving into a stream of pure information. "Father," she whispered, picturing Commander Tai in her mind. "Father, can you hear me?" For several minutes, there was nothing. Jia maintained her focus, adjusting the connection, reaching farther. Then, faintly at first but growing stronger, receiving something, unknown frequency. "Is anyone?" "Father," Jia whispered more urgently. "It's me, Jia." A pause, then Tai's voice came through clearly, filled with shock and hope. "Jia, how is this possible? The Phyrexians block all unauthorized communications." "They can't block what they don't understand," Jia replied, keeping her voice low. "I built this from precursor technology. We don't have much time. They might not detect the frequency, but they could notice unusual energy patterns in my quarters. Are you safe? Are they treating you well?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, "but that's not why I'm contacting you. I've discovered what they really want with me with this technology." "Tell me." "They want weapons, Father," Jia whispered into the secure communication device. "Planet killers. Systems that could dominate the entire galaxy." Tai's voice crackled through the connection. "Can they force you to activate them?" "No. The systems require willing participation." She paused. "What have you done with the payment?" His smile was audible. "Bought ships. Allies. The humans of New Arcadia aren't just surviving anymore. We're preparing." "For what?" "To ensure the galaxy understands. Humans aren't for sale." Jia felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by concern. "The Phyrexians have the largest fleet in this sector. You can't challenge them directly." "We don't have to. We just need to create enough pressure to renegotiate your contract. Get you home." "No," Jia said firmly. "That's not enough. As long as the Phyrexians control this technology, no one is safe. They've been collecting it for centuries, positioning themselves to become the dominant power in the galaxy. What can we do against that kind of advantage?" Jia looked at the glowing crystal under her palm. "I have a plan. But I'll need time, and I'll need your help. Can you get a message to the Tellurian Alliance?" Tai was silent for a moment. "The insect species from the Outer Rim. They're Phyrexian enemies. Contacting them could be seen as an act of war. The Tellurians are the only other species who've managed to activate even basic precursor technology. I found references in the Phyrexian databases. They might be able to help me understand the full network." "I can try," Ta said hesitantly. "We've established some trade connections since you left. The colony is flourishing. We have ships now, regular routes to 3 systems." "Good. Tell the Tellurians we have someone who can fully activate the precursor technology. Don't mention me by name. The Phyrexians have informants everywhere." "When will you contact me again?" "In 7 days. Same time." I'll have more instructions then. Jia paused, feeling a familiar vibration through the floor of her quarters. Someone's coming. I have to go. She quickly disassembled the device and hid the components in various places around her room. Just as she finished, her door slid open and Director Pax entered. You are awake, the Vrexian observed. We detected unusual energy patterns. Jia feigned confusion. I couldn't sleep. I was practicing focusing my connection to the artifacts. Sometimes it helps me relax. Pax's compound eyes studied her for a long moment. You have made remarkable progress in your work. The High Council is pleased. I'm glad to hear it. Tomorrow we will move to a new phase of research, more advanced systems with greater capabilities. Jia nodded, keeping her expression neutral. I look forward to it. After Pax left, Jia lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. The Vrexians were accelerating their timeline. She would need to work faster. Over the next 7 days, Jia split her time between two crucial tasks. During the day, she worked with Pax on the advanced systems, which were, as she had suspected, primarily designed for offensive military applications. She was careful to show progress while subtly introducing small errors into the activation sequences, nothing obvious enough to raise suspicion, but enough to ensure the systems wouldn't function at full capacity. At night, she continued her secret work. Using her growing understanding of the precursor network, she began encoding new protocols into the systems, security measures that would allow only her to access the network's full capabilities. She was creating a backdoor that only she could open. On the 7th night, she reassembled her communication device and contacted her father again. Did you reach the Tellurians? She asked as soon as the connection stabilized. Yes. They were interested. Very interested. They want proof that we have someone who can fully activate the technology. Tell them to monitor the precursor relay station in the Kolnar system in 2 days. I'll send a signal they'll recognize. Jia, what exactly is your plan? She took a deep breath. The precursor technology forms a network across dozens of worlds. If I can access enough nodes, I can lock the entire system, make it unusable to anyone but me. The Vrexians would lose their advantage. And then what? Then we negotiate, not just for my freedom, but for shared access to the technology. No one species should control this power. Tai was silent for a moment. The Vrexians won't give up easily. That's where your fleet comes in. How many ships do you have now? 17. Small vessels mostly, but well armed. And the Tellurians hinted they might provide support if your demonstration proves convincing. Get your ships in position near the Kolnar system. If the Vrexians detect what I'm doing, I'll need extraction. It's risky, Jia. If they catch you, they won't. They still don't understand what I'm capable of. She paused. How is the colony? Thriving. The soil remediation is working. We've had our first successful harvest. People ask about you all the time. You're something of a hero. Jia smiled sadly. Not yet, but soon, maybe. Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm blaring through the ship. Red lights flashed in Joe's quarters. What's happening? Tai asked urgently. I don't know. I have to go. She quickly disassembled the device once more. Minutes later, her door slid open and Security Chief Tal entered with 4 armed guards. Come with us immediately, the Vrexian commanded. There's been a security breach. As Jia was escorted through the corridors of the flagship, she noticed unusual activity. Vrexians moving with urgency, security personnel at every junction. Something significant had happened. In the main command center, Director Pax awaited her arrival. On a large display screen, Jia saw a star map with dozens of blinking indicators. Explain this, Pax demanded, pointing to the screen. Jia studied the display. The blinking points represented precursor relay stations, all simultaneously active for the first time in 50,000 years. She hadn't done this. She wasn't scheduled to attempt network activation for another day. Someone else had beaten her to it. "The network is awakening," she said quietly, genuinely surprised. All by itself. The activation of the precursor network changed everything. For 3 days, Jia worked non-stop alongside the Phyrexian scientists, trying to understand what had happened. The ancient systems had entered some kind of automatic protocol, linking together across vast distances. Director Pax was both thrilled and terrified by this development. "Is this your doing?" he asked Jia repeatedly. She truthfully denied it, though she didn't reveal that she had been planning something similar. On the morning of the 4th day, Jia made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the Phyrexian command structure. The network activation was a response to a specific trigger, the presence of too many precursor artifacts in one location. The Phyrexian flagship. "The system thinks someone is hoarding the technology," she explained to a room full of agitated Phyrexian officials. "It's designed to prevent any single group from monopolizing precursor technology." The High Commander's translator couldn't fully capture the anger in his clicks and whistles. "Can you reverse this activation?" "I'm not sure," Jia answered carefully. "The network seems to be building toward something." What she didn't tell them was that she had spent the previous nights secretly communicating with the precursor systems. She had discovered that the network was not just awakening. It was preparing to lock itself down unless the artifacts were redistributed. The precursors had built-in safeguards against exactly what the Phyrexians were attempting. That night, while the flagship orbited an uninhabited world in the Kolnar system for additional research, Jia sent the signal she had promised to the Tellurians. Using her hidden communication device, she also contacted her father one last time. "It's happening tomorrow," she told him. "The network will lock down at 800 Standard Time. Be ready." "We're in position," Tai confirmed. 17 ships, plus 9 Tellurian vessels that arrived yesterday. They were impressed by your signal. The Phyrexians still don't understand what's coming. Once the lockdown starts, I'll try to reach the shuttle bay. "We'll be waiting," her father promised. Before dawn, Jia made her final preparations. Using her deep connection to the precursor systems, she added one crucial modification to the lockdown protocol, a genetic key that would allow her, and only her, to access the technology afterward. If her plan worked, the Phyrexians would have no choice but to negotiate. She was in the research chamber when the lockdown began. One by one, the artifacts started to pulse with a deep red light instead of their usual blue. The ship's alarms activated immediately. "What's happening?" Director Pax demanded, rushing into the chamber. "The network is protecting itself," Jia explained, watching as panic spread among the Phyrexian scientists. "It's locking down all precursor technology." "Stop it. Reverse the process." "I can't," she said simply. "This was built into the system from the beginning." As the Phyrexians frantically tried to contain the situation, a new alarm sounded. The security displays showed multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace near the flagship. "We have incoming vessels," a security officer reported. "Human and Tellurian configurations." Director Pax's compound eyes fixed on Judd with new understanding. "This was your plan." Before he could say more, the ship rocked violently. The coalition forces had targeted the flagship's propulsion systems, immobilizing the massive vessel without destroying it. Alarms blared throughout the Phyrexian flagship as Ju's father's coalition appeared from hyperspace. Not a massive fleet, but positioned strategically near crucial Phyrexian supply lines. Director Pax burst into Ju's chamber. "What have you done?" "Created a stalemate," she replied calmly. "I've locked the precursor systems. Permanently." The Phyrexian's compound eyes widened. "Impossible. Unless all spacefaring species agree to study and share this technology peacefully," Jia continued, "with humans as equal partners." For several tense hours, the Phyrexian leadership debated their options. Their military advantage was significant, but the coalition forces had positioned themselves to cause maximum economic damage if fighting broke out. And without access to the precursor technology they had spent centuries collecting. Their long-term plans were in ruins. Eventually, the High Commander made the only rational choice. He agreed to negotiations. The Phyrexian flagship's Grand Conference Chamber had been designed to impress visitors with the consortium's power and wealth. Today, it served as the site of their greatest diplomatic defeat. Representatives from 12 species gathered around the massive table, the coalition forces plus observers from other interested parties who had quickly arrived once word of the confrontation spread. Commander Tarkovich led the human delegation, his face showing no emotion as he faced the Phyrexians who had purchased his daughter. The Tellurian ambassador, a mantis-like being with gleaming green exoskeleton, sat nearby, mandibles clicking occasionally in what Jia recognized as amusement. The negotiations lasted 18 hours. Jia was called upon repeatedly to explain the precursor lockdown and the conditions for its reversal. The final agreement, which would become known as the Kolnar Accord, established a multi-species research consortium with equal access to precursor technology. The Phyrexians would surrender most of their collection to be distributed among member worlds. Humans, despite being relative newcomers to interstellar society, were granted full membership. When the negotiations concluded, Tai approached his daughter. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, months of separation, and the weight of what they had accomplished hanging between them. "Did you plan this from the beginning?" she asked. "Not all of it," he admitted. "But I knew what you would do when you understood what was at stake. You've always been smarter than me." Jia looked at her father, seeing him truly for the first time in months. "We've changed the course of galactic history." "No," Ta corrected, embracing his daughter. "You did." As they prepared to leave the Phyrexian flagship, Director Pax approached them one last time. "The price we paid for you," he said to Jia, "was considered extravagant by many in the consortium. 10 billion credits for a single human. Now I understand it was far too little." Jia considered the Phyrexian scientist who had been both her jailer and her colleague these past months. The precursors left their technology for all intelligent species to share. They believed in cooperation, not dominance. Perhaps now we can all learn from their wisdom. 2 days later, aboard a human transport vessel returning to New Arcadia, Jia stood at a viewport watching stars streak by. Her father joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The colony has changed while you were gone," he said. "We've expanded, built new sectors, established trade routes with 6 systems. All because of the price they paid for me," Jia murmured. "No," Tay replied firmly. "The money started it. But what's happening now is because of what you did with the precursor network. 3 species have already requested permission to establish research outposts near our colony. New Arcadia will become a center for multi-species cooperation." Jia smiled, thinking of the small dwelling where she had grown up, the technical manuals she had studied, the first precursor artifact she had activated as a child. "What will you do now?" her father asked. "The Kolnar Accord gives you significant authority over precursor research." Jia thought about the genetic key she had encoded into the network, the responsibility she now carried. "First, I'm going home," she said. "After that, I think I'll start teaching others what I've learned. The precursors left their legacy for everyone, not just for me." As New Arcadia appeared on the view screen, growing larger as they approached, Jia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The daughter who had been sold was returning home, not as property, but as the architect of a new era of galactic cooperation.